Hey guys, welcome to the Daily Word Bible Study, a plain and simple book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse study through the entire Bible. And currently we are in Matthew chapter 12. And this is going to be a very interesting study. Because we're going to get a good look at how Jesus feels about religion. Now, I was going to say that Jesus was not a religious person, but that wouldn't be necessarily accurate because Jesus was religion. And even though sometimes we like to say that we are not religion, a lot of times you see people saying that I'm not following religion, I have a relationship. Well, what did that mean? Right? What did that mean that you have a relationship? I mean, and then and I'm not gonna go too deep into that. Fine, you do have a relationship, but it's certainly not dependent upon emotions, fantasy. So when we talk about religion, so there is good religion, and then there is bad religion. So when we talk about religion, religion is the observance of something, and of course, something. When we say religious, something with uh, worship, worship of something, and then the idea of whatever the deity is, you you're following the precepts of that deity. So the deity, and then you have the precepts of the deity, what is expected that they think, so, and that, of course, that can go a long way, right? I mean, there's millions of applications there. Of course, in our context, we are talking about Christianity, Judaism. And so what is the religion, say, of Christianity? And then is it good? Now, James said that a pure religion, let me pull up my screen here, because I want you to have this thought here. I want you to have this thought, and I think let's go to chapter 2. Or was it 1? I should have. Here we go. Here it is. So, look at verse 26. He says, if anyone thinks he is religious without controlling his tongue, this is James chapter 1, verse 26, then his religion is useless and he deceives himself. Pure and undefiled religion before our God and Father is this: to look after orphans, widows in their distress, and to keep oneself unstained by the world. Now, of course, that wouldn't be the only thing, but the point about this is how people focus. And notice what James is saying. No, people will focus on commands, precepts. Okay? And the longer the list, it doesn't matter. But they don't focus on what God tells them to focus on. So when he says here, pure religion and undefiled before God and our Father is this. So now, a religion, remember, is an observance. So pure and undefiled religion before our God and our Father is this: to look at the orphan and widows in their distress and to keep oneself unstained by the world. So those are the things that God will worry about. Now, you come to Christianity, and every single denomination Okay, every single one will miss this at some point. So let's get to Matthew chapter 12. And here's a good example of when Jesus clashes with religious people, now the Pharisees. Okay, so he says, at that time, Jesus passed through the grain fields on the Sabbath. Now, this was their pet peeve. Their pet peeve was we have to keep the Sabbath. Now, the Sabbath had strict commands under the Old Testament law. And basically it's this: you cannot do any work. Now, believe it or not, there are people today that keep the Sabbath. And there's a wide range of people that will call themselves Christians, or maybe not Christians, but they will say, we're going to keep the command, the Sabbath. Now, again, the Sabbath means don't do any work. It was a day of rest. Now, watch what unfolds here, right? And I mean, literally, you could not do any work. And when it says don't do any work, that literally what it means. In fact, in the Old Testament, there was a man that got killed because he gathered sticks to kindle a fire. And they called him and they said, well, hey, Moses, what should we do with this guy? He was gathering sticks. Moses said, put him in jail until we hear from the Lord. And the Lord said, he's got to go because he shouldn't have been gathering sticks. So now we come to the Pharisees. And then the Pharisees always try to get Jesus. Right? They always try to get Jesus. So, at that time, Jesus passed through the grain fields on the Sabbath. His disciples were hungry and began to pick and eat some heads of grain. Now, actually, the heads of grain is not, when they're talking, well, they said here, I think your King James says corn, but this is the meaning. Oh, excuse me, this is the meaning. It is actually grain. A little bitty, you could almost say seeds, but they were grain. He said, but when the Pharisees saw it, they said to him, look, your disciples are doing what is not lawful to do on the Sabbath. So here was the paradox. Were they working on the Sabbath? Now, under the law, if you were traveling and you were hungry, you could pick, you could stop and you could pick from someone's field or tree. In this case, the grain. Now, the law says that you could only get enough just to feed you. So you could not store. You know how some of y'all is bring out y'all purse, get those little baggies and start filling up. That would be breaking the law. In other words, the law says, okay, if you're hungry, just get enough to eat and then keep it stepping. That's what the law says. So the reality is that they were not breaking the law because they were actually abiding by the law. Now, the Pharisees, if they was going to accuse them, would have had to accuse them of storing up grain. Now, look at how Jesus responds. Verse 3. He said to them, have you read what David did when he and those who were with him were hungry? Excuse me, how they entered the house of God and they ate the sacred bread, which is not lawful for him or for those with him to eat, but only for the priest. Then he says, or haven't you read in the law that on the Sabbath days the priests in the temple violate the Sabbath and are innocent? But I tell you, something greater than the temple is here, meaning himself. Okay? So he's going to point out something that one time David was eating, he went and got bread. He got the actual sacred bread. Now, this is kind of interesting, especially when you compare this to pagan religions, because they store food for the gods, and you could have a famine outside, and that the granaries would be full of food, and they wouldn't feed the people because they were for the gods. So, Um, he said, but David went in and ate that sacred bread. So then he said, verse 7, if you had known what this means, I desire mercy and not sacrifice, you would not have condemned the innocent. And then he said, for the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. And that, of course, sent them off into a tizzy. But notice that statement there, I desire mercy, not sacrifice. See, religious people do not take, they ignore, they dismiss the mercy of God. And they focus on, are you doing the commands? Are you keeping every letter of the law? Are you keeping every comma, every dot, crossing every T? But they miss. Notice he said, I desire mercy and not sacrifice. That's what religion miss. They will condemn you to hell over the slightest thing, and yet will never ever promote God's mercy. Verse 9, moving on from there, he entered their synagogue, and there he saw a man who had a paralyzed hand. And actually the word paralyzed can also mean that he was crippled. He was, crippled. Okay. So then there he saw a man had a paralyzed hand, and in order to accuse him, they asked him, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? Right? So what is, but again, go back to understanding this, how asinine this question is. The Sabbath is a day of rest. Now they're asking, well, can you heal? So again, look at the religious side. They would rather the man suffer, hurt, right? Be in displeasure in order to keep the Sabbath. And they think God thinks that way. See, that's religion. They actually think God would much rather this man suffer until after the Sabbath. Because they think that the commands, all God is interested in, all God is interested in is that you keep this commandment. But now watch the hypocrisy. Verse 11, but he said to them, what man among you, if he had a sheep that fell into a pit on the Sabbath, wouldn't he take hold of it and lift it out? A man is worth far more than a sheep. So it is lawful to do what is good on the Sabbath. Notice that, to do what is good. You go back to Genesis chapter 1 and you look at everything when God created it, he said it was good. And then, guess what? He rested on that seventh day. But religious people will say, well, you know what? Even if it means you're suffering, God would much rather you what? Rest. Well, how can you rest if you're tormented by illness, by affliction? See, that's and notice what he says right here. Wouldn't you get your sheep out? And by the way, Jesus is saying that would be good, because God would not want the sheep to be wallowing, flailing in the ditch just because it's Sabbath, and don't get them out because it's Sabbath. And even though it would require work, you would have to do work to get the sheep out, throw the ropes down and then pull them out. That is work. But notice he said, it is lawful to do what is good. It would be good to bring the suffering sheep out. And then he says, and how much more man? Now I like this statement because again, John 3:16 tells us that for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son. And one of the definitions I like to use with that is that God valued us. See, he valued us so that he gave the very best that he could give, which is his son. God could not give a better gift than Jesus. So notice what he says here. A man is worth far more than sheep. How do we know that? Because God gave the very best gift he could in order to redeem man, his son. Verse 13, so he told the man, stretch out your hand. So he stretched it out, and it was restored. Now, in the other gospel, when we get to Mark especially, we're going to see that Jesus is going to look around them with anger because of the hardness and the callousness of the heart. That you would much rather this man suffer to fulfill your tradition, your view. Verse 14, but the Pharisees went out and plotted against him how they might destroy him. And isn't that something? Here Jesus healed the man, it was restored as good as the other, right? Look at verse 13 again, and he told the man, stretch out your hand. So he stretched it out, and it was restored as good as the other. And instead of rejoicing in that, no, he broke the Sabbath. He must pay. He broke the Sabbath. Verse 15, when Jesus became aware of this, he withdrew from there. Huge crowds followed him, and he healed them all. Now, despite all of this, it's funny because the Pharisees did, did not care about the welfare of people, but God did. So anyway, verse 16, he warned them not to make him known, so that it was spoken through the prophet Isaiah that might be fulfilled. Hear my servant, whom I have chosen, my beloved in whom my soul delights. I will put my spirit on him, and he will proclaim justice to the nations, and he will not argue or shout, and no one will hear his voice in the streets. He will not break a bruised reed, and he will not put out a smoldering wick until he has led justice to victory. The nations will put their hope in his name. So another messianic prophecy that Jesus was fulfilling. In other words, he didn't advertise, and he certainly did not boast that, look at me, I'm the Messiah. Look at me. Now compare that to a lot of pastors and ministers you see on TV. Just you can just compare. Now, if you think about this, Jesus didn't have to boast, did he? I mean, as they say, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. People were getting healed. Okay. Now, notice when he says he warned them not to make him known. Now, in some respects, it's also have to be put in context, because how could you not be made known? So, a paralyzed man, a blind man, right? Any kind of sickness, and you get healed, and people know that you're sick. How can you not, right? How can you not be known? And some of the reasons why, now in this case here, you could say that Jesus would tell them, oh, don't worry about it. Even though he would always tell them to go to Moses and offer the offerings according to the Mosaic law, because Jesus ministered under the law, and that would not end until his death, burial, and resurrection. So sometimes he would tell people not to tell them, because depending on where he was at, he would not want it known, because people would, again, the crowds would rush him. They would throng him, okay? And so he would sometimes, that's some of the reasons why he would tell them not to make him known. So again, here is another messianic prophecy that was fulfilled. This one was in Isaiah. Let me see here. Isaiah. These don't have it here. Okay. Where is it at? Just don't even have it. Okay. I forgot which part of Isaiah this for that. All right, guys. We'll stop it here and pick it up in the next study, when we will get into the blaspheming against the Holy Spirit. Can you blaspheme the Holy Spirit? And we'll get into that next time. All right, don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to BP the Bible Perspective. And as always, if you have a thought or comment, add it to the comment section below. All comments are welcome, and I will see you in the next study.